Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, with a little planning ahead, you can protect yourself from compelled disclosures. We'll give you the details, plus a bunch of ways to protect your privacy online, a big batch of your questions, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. And welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 114 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly Systems Network and Administration podcast. We stream this episode live on June 13th, 2013. This episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the Faux Show, and switches to Android tonight. Check out the Faux Show. And of course, the live stream is provided by Scale Engine over at ScaleEngine.com. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Howdy, Alan. Big week. A lot of things have happened this week. We've got so much email. We have a huge feedback segment, so everybody stay tuned because a lot of stuff around privacy has come in this week. Some follow-ups, some corrections to some stupid stuff that I said last week. You know, the usual stuff. But we have a really great feedback, so I'm excited to get to that. But Alan, I know that we have our vegetables. There's been some news stories that hit your radar first, so we'll start
This
there.
is just a couple of things that were a little too big for the roundup, basically.
Yeah. I mean, the feedback, it's interesting. Feedback is like a huge part of the
basically,
show today.
this is a feedback episode, and so I didn't really grab news stories. There was a couple of things that were a little too big to go in the roundup.
A couple of things we got to cover. All right, where do we start?
The first was a document that came out from the Apache SSL group, or two researchers there anyway, about how to protect yourself against compelled disclosure, basically where the government makes you
we need you to
give up your
decrypt that laptop
keys.
or yeah.
Since most governments seem to have the ability to do this to you, or are passing laws that would allow them to basically compel you to provide the key to decrypt your laptop or whatever.
Yeah.
And but also, this also kind of applies to the whole XKCD, $5 wrench is the best way to break cryptography.
Why is a $5 wrench the best way to break it?
Well, because instead of spending billions of dollars building a supercomputer to crack the PGP encryption somebody has, you just hit them in the kneecaps with a $5 wrench until they tell you the key.
Yeah, okay, I got you. All right, I got you. That's clever.
Right? You've seen the thing before, right?
Yeah, okay. No, I don't know if I've seen that one, but
You've not seen that XKCD before. You need to. We'll get it in the show notes. Anyway.
Okay, all right. Okay.
So this basically, in addition to the government stealing your, making you give up your keys, it also deals with, organized crime, kidnapping somebody and trying to get their key and things like that. And so it kind of talks about the different things you can do to protect yourself against things like that. One of the ideas is to use a lot of short-lived keys, maybe all signed by a master key. So like they have this, the typical crypto thought experiment of Alice emailing Bob, right? And basically with each email that she sends to Bob, she includes the public key for a new private key. And so basically every reply that Bob sends is encrypted to a different key. Or it would have to be every email Bob sends until Alice sends Bob as another email. And this way, if someone got the key, they would only have, that one or two emails instead of all of them.
Right.
Although, that becomes a bit of a key management problem.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking, I'm not going to be able to do something like that.
Right. Well, this is mostly a thought experiment. Somebody would maybe implement something that would handle this a little more for you. Because, the crypto suites for clients don't do this yet.
Right.
The other one it talked about is the problem of storing your emails, right? So you have your encrypted emails, so you have to keep all of your old keys around so you can decrypt your old emails. The problem is that means someone could steal your private key somehow.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, the longer you got to leave something around, the more likely you are to put it somewhere that somebody's going to find it.
Or, right. And so...
Like for me, honestly, if I have to bring a key with me over and over and over again, eventually I break down and throw it in my Dropbox. That way I just know if I reload, I've got it. And, then somebody could, the right people could get access to that.
So this one is the idea that, say, the government or criminals or whatever, somebody intercepts the encrypted email. So they have the encrypted email, they just need the key. So what the document proposes is that you would decrypt your encrypted emails, then re-encrypt them with a storage key.
Oh.
right? And then destroy the original key. That way, the person who's intercepted your email, there's no way they can get the private key to decrypt that because you've destroyed it.
That's interesting.
No copy of it exists anymore.
Right. What do you think of that? So then you still have to. You still have to move
means that there's a juicier key that gets all your old emails.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Then you sort of just consolidate all of your risks down to one key, and then it's even more critical you don't lose that key, and then it's even more critical if somebody gets that.
Well, it depends how sensitive the emails are once they're older as well, though, right?
Yeah.
Like, you might not care as much about 2-year-old emails. Although, if it was secret, it's probably still secret.
Yeah.
Right, so it talks about a bunch of things like that. Also, using separate keys for different things, right? So, like, if you're encrypting files, if you have a different key for each file, if you get compelled to disclose the key, you can give them the key only for that one file or one set of information instead of everything.
This is one of the things that TrueCrypt does really well that I like is you can have sort of hidden encrypted volumes. So you could give the appearance that you're handing over.
Right, that's the next thing is a steganographic file system where basically there are multiple keys, and if you can give away a dummy key that makes it look like they're getting everything, but they're not actually getting everything.
Right. I like that one.
Yeah, and that one's especially useful if the government's forcing you to give up your key. You can give them the key. And
to me, it seems like if you were really worried about long-term secure storage of email, your probably best solution would be to take it off of an email server and put it into some sort of like HTML or text format and archive that and encrypt that with some sort of encryption system. Because the thing about any kind of email storage is at some point that's going to get targeted. Like if somebody comes in and they want to grab your past emails, they're going to go specifically after the mail server. So leaving them on there is sort of, I think, mistake number one.
Right, you could move them to because like on my mail server, all the files are stored in the format called maildir, which basically is a separate file for each email, and
right.
It's the original text, right? Because all email is text. Even when there's an attachment, it's encoded into 7-bit ASCII, right? Base 64 encoding. Or that'd be 6-bit. Anyway, so each email is a separate file, and they're all in directories. So yeah, it'd be easy to back those up, and they can be read by most different clients as is without needing special formatting or anything. But the biggest thing is if you want protection against this kind of thing is you would want to avoid using the cloud for anything.
Right.
If the email server is secure in your data center or whatever, it's less likely someone's going to be able to physically take copies of your emails without you knowing.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's at Google, they can make Google give them the emails and give Google a gag order saying Google can't tell you that they had to give your emails to the government.
And I've finally gotten away from running my own mail server. I feel like I'm free of that. And now I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, well, maybe. So, well, I don't mean to get all paranoid like in the first 15 minutes of our show, but, one of the things I realized is on a busy day, I get a couple hundred emails in my inbox. And minimum 30% of those are from outside the United States. And I don't know who I'm talking to. I don't know who's emailing me. I don't know what connections or lists they're on. And I do wonder at some point, because all of this is going into a Google account, if maybe I do run the risk of getting at least flagged for monitoring at some point because of these high volume of correspondences with people outside the U.S.
Yep.
That does concern me. So then I started thinking, maybe I should put all this on my own mail server again. I just don't. Alan, can I get a VM with mail on it?
Basically with an incoming email, they're usually not encrypted, although some servers will talk to each other over SSL.
Yeah,
a lot of times, the delivery of email to your email server is not encrypted.
Yeah, this is something we talked about.
If somebody's tapping you upstream, they can see the content of the email. You want to make sure that when you're accessing your email to that remote server, if you're always doing it over SSL with IMAP or whatever, then if the government's wiretap is on your house, not on the mail server, then they won't be able to see the content of the emails. Because as long as you're sending and receiving to your server over SSL, they won't be able to read it.
Yeah.
Unless they do a man-in-the-middle attack with a certificate authority they've compromised.
We don't really know how. It probably varies depending on the situation. They probably, in some cases, have an agreement set up with the company. I'm thinking more about a Jupiter Broadcasting mail server.
But yeah, there's a reason for the last 10 years I've always done my own email.
Yeah.
Mostly just because then I know how it works.
Yeah. I was toying with the idea, too, of, if I only need email for 5 or 10 people, could I do it on a Raspberry Pi? What do you think?
Possibly, but when you want something with more reliable storage?
Well, then I was thinking, okay, so this is the other way I was going to go, is do you think I could do it on my FreeNAS box? Probably not, huh?
Probably. Plug in jail.
Have to do some digging on that. If anybody out there is running a mail server on the FreeNAS box or has tried and it blew up, let me know. Let me know how that works.
Well, basically, you wouldn't run it on the FreeNAS itself, but with the plug-in jail system, you could have real FreeBSD in a jail.
In a jail.
And then you can run a mail server, yeah.
Yeah, but then I could just run it in a, yeah. I mean, I have VM servers that run off of it too, but
yeah.
I'm just getting sick of setting up servers. All right, well, any other thoughts on this story?
I do like a couple a week, every week.
I know, well, I'm burned out, man. I'm getting old and grumpy.
Puppet.
Yeah, no kidding. That would make it better.
I've got it. No, I'm using the FreeBSD package NG now, and so fast.
I've talked about this on LAS, just thinking about encrypted email, by the way, just to change topics for a second. I've been playing with BitMessage for the last week. Have you heard of BitMessage?
No.
Kind of like the concept of Bitcoin, obviously based on the name, where there's it's not necessarily a blockchain that everybody shares, but there's an equivalent database that only lasts for 2 days. So it's a whole peer-to-peer. Everything is encrypted system. There's unique identifier keys for everything. So you send to that unique identifier key, and then via the P2P system, it gets delivered to the right person. So it's not traceable. I've gotten about 20 or 30 messages back and forth with audience members because I posted it on Twitter.
Right.
And it's neat, and it solves the encryption problem, and it solves the
I guess it solves the routing problem, kind of, so that the government can tell who you're communicating with, right? Because if you had just GPG encrypted emails, they couldn't see the content of any of the email,
right?
But they could see the relationship of who you're talking to a lot.
Metadata, yeah.
Although, if you just routed the emails over Tor, wouldn't that solve the problem too?
Yeah, it's not, I'm not saying BitMessage is like the savior, because it also is a little wonky in its early days, but it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting way to sort of solve it's email redone, and I like a lot of things about it, but yeah, I don't know. Tor mail's out there too. There's other solutions as well. But all right, any other thoughts on that one?
Nope.
All right, Alan, then you know what I got to do. I got to take a little break here and thank this week's sponsor, GoDaddy.com. And of course, it's GoDaddy.com. You know why? It's GoDaddy.com, longtime sponsors of the TechSNAP program. And when you're over at GoDaddy, you can get a .com for $2.49 if you use the code TECH249. TECH249 for $2.49 of your .com, and then it's $9.99 after that. Look, if you're going to... Look, when the .com is $2.49, it's worth getting one for a presentation, for a client, anything that you want to just sort of take it up to the next level. You want to get something on your business card that just redirects to your Twitter or your Google Plus profile page. This is the time to do it for $2.49. It's obviously going to be a limited offer. So when you're over at GoDaddy, use the code TECH249 when you're checking out. But maybe, my friend, you have other aspirations in life. Perhaps you want some hosting. Maybe you want one of them SSL certifications, making you more secure. Well, then good news. Use the code 35OFF3 when you're over at GoDaddy.com. 35 off 3 gets you 35% on anything in your cart. So, man, go to town. Go nuts. Act like you're at Costco up in this place and just throw a bunch of stuff in there and then use that code. You're saving money. And when you're getting 35% right off the top, it's like a haircut, my friend. So 35 off 3. And thanks to GoDaddy for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. We appreciate it. And we appreciate you guys using our sponsors, keeping us on the air, letting them know that you appreciate them helping us out. All right, Alan. There you go. Thanks, GoDaddy. So, I had all these links loaded up for the motion to compel stuff, and I didn't really show very much of it. But you have some good links in the show notes. I should give that a mention.
Links for which?
The compelled to disclose. You had a link to a PDF.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the PDF from the Apache SSO. Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, next
little
story.
ZFS time. What do you say?
Yes.
Okay. What's going on in ZFS?
So ZFS trim support, which is, basically allows the file system to tell the SSD, I'm not using this block anymore, so you can garbage collect it and use it for your wear leveling and stuff. Basically, with the way SSDs work, where your data is kind of stored in different places and moved around, unlike a regular spinning hard drive where, there's a physical address and then the data is on the spot on the disk where the drive thinks it is.
Right.
But with SSDs, the data kind of gets moved all over, and the SSDs are actually bigger than they claim because flash wears out over time. So if you have, a 240 gig SSD, it's actually bigger than that, probably 256 or 300 gigs.
Right.
Or some number like that, 320 gigs. And then the extra space is basically swapped in for the different cells as they wear out, and things like that. So because of all this, the SSD would benefit from knowing which data isn't being used anymore, which is deleted basically, and which isn't. It's because it knows, all right, that data is deleted, I can overwrite it, and so on. And this is why SSDs have, especially before trim support became a major thing, SSDs would get slower over time because this space would get all fragmented and so on. So anyway, ZFS trim support was committed to FreeBSD in September of 2012.
Hey-o.
But it was in the current branch, right? Which meant only the developmental version had it.
Oh, okay.
And that's how all features happen in FreeBSD. They go there and they sit for a while and people test them and make sure it doesn't break everything horribly, right? And patches went in and changes were made. There's some statistics stuff that went in. They changed the name of the tunable variables so they make more sense. They reversed it. So instead of having a flag that marks whether trim is disabled or not, there's a flag of whether it's enabled or not. And they changed the default along the way to be enabled by default and a bunch of things like that. The way the ZFS trim support works is when you add the device to your Z pool, it basically trims the whole thing and then writes the data to it, right? So it reinitializes it at the beginning.
Okay.
So because of that, when you add a new device to your Z pool, it might take a while before it actually starts being used, right? Because it has to trim the whole drive first. There is a sysctl you can tune to make it not do that, although I don't know why you would want to do that. If you like the trim support in the regular UFS file system on FreeBSD, there was a flag in NewFS where you would say, hey, trim this whole drive as you're formatting it, right? So ZFS basically has that and does it by default.
Very nice.
So you might be able to skip that if it's a brand new drive, right? So you don't need to trim the whole drive when it's just out of the box. But maybe you want to anyway. But anyway, that gives it a basis to work from. And then basically ZFS can trim the stuff as it's done with it. And that allows the performance to remain high over time. And they also added trim support for the L2 ARC. So if you're using an SSD for a read cache, it can trim that as well. And that came slightly later.
Now, you do use SSDs for that, don't you?
I don't have any L2 ARCs, although I do have some Z pools where the entire pool is SSDs.
Okay.
And that stores like 20 million tiny files in hash directory sets. And so, yeah, it was definitely great to have it on an SSD.
So are you turning it on?
So this is in 9 stable now.
Yeah.
So it means it'll be in 9.2.
I see. Right.
Some of my machines are running 9 stable, so I just have to, update the source and rebuild and reboot.
Yeah.
But I'd have to empty the SSD, trim it, and then load the data back on first. So it's something we plan to do, but it's not something
Not going to rush to
yet.
it. Yeah. I know what you mean. Because
I have a bunch of other things I need to do first.
Yeah.
But yes, I will get to that.
Okay. Well, that's cool. I have not now that it compares with the ZFS, Alan, but I have ButterFS on my laptop, and they have in the mount options in FS tab, they have you just put SSD in there, and it turns on. And I don't even know what all of them are because I was going quick trying to get it set up for last. It just turns on a whole bunch of flags like trim support and a few other things that are better for SSDs, and I'm blanking on what they are, but it's neat. It's just. I love that now it's just comment, SSD, save, reboot. Oh, good to go. All my file systems mounted just fine. It's good to see these modern file systems getting SSD support because honestly, I think it was Microsoft that beat everybody to the punch. Microsoft's had it for years. Windows 7 shipped with trim support, I think, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and then...
And, FreeBSD's UFS has had trim support for a long time.
Right.
With ZFS, mostly because of the enterprise-grade nature of the people using ZFS on FreeBSD.
Right.
They didn't want to rush to do it and have it end up breaking shit.
Well, and really, I mean, SSDs really
So
haven't been
it
at
may
the
have been
capacity
overly
where.
cautious.
Well, they should be. I mean, SSDs really haven't been at a huge capacity where they're getting massive deployments. They're more like used in smaller scales for caching and like at the lower end. So it kind of makes sense that they would take their time. All right, Alan. Well, there you go. There's the news for this week. See, we told you it would be a brief one because we have a huge feedback. So with the news all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP at JupiterBroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of our website, or even better, like a lot of you did, start a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. All right, Alan, what do you say we start with the first email? Are you ready?
Yep.
All right. Comes in from Graham, and he says, another great show, but I have to say for once, I disagree with Chris. For VMs, we see the same performance with iSCSI and NFS on ESX, with NFS being far simpler to deploy and manage, especially at scale. The performance issues you've seen are likely due to poor NFS implementations rather than issues with the protocol. VMware did testing on this, and he links us to the PDF article. While dated, you see NFS and iSCSI are on par for performance. Now, this is interesting because I took a stand and I said, if you're serious and you're doing virtualization in the enterprise, you need to use iSCSI. But he's saying, Graham's saying.
Well, basically, he's got a PDF here, research from VMware, where they tested NFS versus software iSCSI versus hardware iSCSI, and found performance is basically equivalent between them all, although there's slightly higher CPU usage on NFS. NFS is more CPU than software iSCSI, which is more than hardware iSCSI, but that's to be expected.
Yeah.
And the numbers are minuscule amounts of CPU. And I back that up. I saturate gigabit over NFS all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm using FreeBSD's NFS, not your Red Hat or whatever you were using.
Well, this client was using CentOS. And, if I recall, so this box that they're doing this storage off of, if I recall, one of the issues was the CPU usage NFS was taking when everything was really cranking away. But it was
possibly
the issue but then and they got this box doing rsync scripts, and it's also running Samba that's managing some printers. So it's not just doing the storage, which would not be ideal.
If they're doing rsync scripts over SSH, that could be taxing the CPU quite heavily.
It does. It's doing it over.
They should look at the newer version of OpenSSH with the none cipher, which allows you to do encryption
puts
for the login phase, but no encryption for the file transfer phase over your LAN.
Oh, really?
Useful.
That's pretty smart. Well, it also does. The other thing it does is it just puts rsync, and especially when it's firing up, can be pretty intensive on the disk I/O. So you have Samba doing stuff for disk I/O. You have the NFS mount. So.
Yeah, and when you lack something like ZFS with the L2 with the ARC and the scheduler for deciding how to read from the disk, when you have a lot of stuff happening at once, it can crash pretty badly.
I think where my bias against NFS comes in, and mind you, in my own personal home network here at my house, I am using NFS for my storage backend for my VMs. Mm-hmm. But in the enterprise, I've always sort of shied away from that. And I've always gone with hardware HBAs when possible. I mean, I think part of that has been influenced by the Windows culture that a lot of vendors around here have, because in a Windows shop, NFS is a bad word, right? That's a dirty word. You don't use the word NFS in a Windows shop. So if you don't have NFS as an option...
Because the NFS client for Windows has always been balls.
Yeah, totally. So then your next option is iSCSI. So there was... I do work with a lot of Windows servers, so there's that bias that's introduced.
And yeah, it is... iSCSI support in Windows is much more reliable than NFS.
Yeah. So, I would say, thanks for Graham for sending in his experience with that.
Yes, especially for finding that VMware article that where someone's actually done some measurements and stuff.
Yeah, like VMware.
When I got that email, I immediately shared the PDF file with a couple of people who deal with FreeNAS and NFS versus iSCSI questions all the time.
Now I've upset Mr. Mango in the chat room. He says, I've got Windows storage server, has NFS mounts on it for Linux servers just fine. All right, Mr. Mango, are you running 15, 20 virtual machines off that?
Also, did you run NFS or Unix services for Windows under Windows NT?
Oh, that was awful.
To get the bad taste in your mouth and just never want to touch it again?
I think on Windows, iSCSI makes more sense. I don't know. By the way, TechSNAP's live. If you didn't know that, Thursdays, 1 p.m. Pacific.
I did not know that.
I know. It's on 4 p.m. Eastern. That's your time zone, Alan, over at jblive.tv. Then Mr. Mango says he runs 7 VMs off of it. I wouldn't do it myself, but, it's good to know it works. In a pinch, and those actually, it's funny that I'm saying that because one of my arguments for it last week was, by the way, in a pinch, Windows can use NFS too. I said that last week, so I'm all over the place. All right, Alan.
Well, really, the question is, why is he running the VMs on top of a Windows machine? Just a waste of RAM. But anyway.
All right, Ryan writes in. He's got a pfSense question. Hi, guys. A few episodes ago, you talked about network performance and IP perf. Or iPerf, actually. Well, as soon as I got home, I saturated my network with iPerf test to see how well it would stand up to my theoretical 1 gig infrastructure. Between my OpenSUSE servers, I can obtain 950 megabits across an Asante manageable switch, 850 megabits when the switch is bypassed with a direct Cat6 cable. Kind of odd that he gets less performance when he goes...
That might actually be because a switch will have a small buffer for each port. Like 32 kilobytes of memory or something, or some of the higher end ones will have a megabyte, and it can actually let you get higher speed.
That makes sense. He goes on to say, here's the part that shocked me. I use a pfSense on an Intel 3200 SH server motherboard with 3 Intel Pro 1000 NICs, 4 gigs of RAM, and an Intel 2.8 gigahertz Core 2 Duo processor. I installed the iPerf package on pfSense and tested the throughput to the firewall. I was getting 850 megabits a second. When I tested from a server attached to one NIC through the firewall to a server attached to the other Pro 1000 NIC, I could only obtain 350 megabits a second. The NICs are both PCIe 4X. Is there any configuration changes I could make on pfSense to get better throughput? I can understand some loss in speed since the firewall has to process the traffic, but losing almost 500 megabits a second seems a bit excessive. Hopefully, you guys can shine some light on this. Congrats on the show 100. Unfortunately, I started listening late and still catching up on the shows. I missed my opportunity to get the 100 t-shirt, but you can sure I'll get caught up in time for episode 200. Love the show, Ryan. So what do you think, Alan? Is a 500 megabit overhead acceptable for pfSense?
No. I'm not sure what's happening there. I don't know that much about his hardware setup and so on. But as an example, I have a bunch of Supermicro servers that have 4 Intel gigabit NICs, and I can pass the whole gigabit through them without an issue. Like in one NIC and out a different NIC. So basically, one of them acts as, or 2 of them act as routers, and they can both push a gigabit out over the internet. Just for comparison, doing iPerf over TCP between 2 of those boxes, I'm getting 935 megabits a second over my LAN.
Okay. All right.
Just between gigabit NIC to gigabit NIC.
I wonder if he has...
pretty close to the top end.
So what I found...
You'd have to see what's top saying in the machine.
On the pfSense?
On the pfSense box.
Yeah.
Does he have any of the hardware offloading turned on? And
the other thing, so remember, I mentioned this once before, but I had a client who was turned off NTOP and some other bandwidth graphing. I can't remember what it was. And things sped up after he did that. So potentially,
it could be something like that as well.
pfSense was slowing things down to analyze the traffic. I don't know what was going on there. But it was literally you turn it off, speed goes up. You check the box, turn it back on, speed went down. It was like that noticeable. So maybe go in there and let us know. I don't know, Ryan. Also, if you folks have any ideas, submit a discussion thread in the TechSNAP subreddit. Maybe you can help Ryan out if you've run into this issue, because we got a lot of pfSense users out there.
I'll test it if I get time. We have a pfSense box, which is some fancy HP hardware, and it's
pretty nice.
It's got 4 gigabit interfaces, and we push a lot more traffic than that. We keep it busy all the time without any trouble.
Okay. All right. I got you. All right. Our next thread.
Let's try throwing some traffic through.
Yeah, this one's a scale engine question.
But yeah, I'm throwing traffic through 2 routers, and I'm getting 865 megabits a second without any trouble.
Well, there you go, Alan. There you go. All right, so the next one comes in. It's a scale engine question, and it's from sysadmin. That's a clever one. How did you get? Oh no, that's his flare because I'm looking from too far away. It's from P Pumpkin. Hi, Chris. I finally got my Raspberry Pi to stream the camera module to a CRTMP server on an Ubuntu machine I got. The process on the Pi is that it pipes the rasp-vid to FFmpeg and then does FLV RTMP to the CRTMP server. This works nicely, but I had an idea that might require some on-demand bandwidth, security, and scalability. I'm new to video streaming and I was wondering, how could I feed Scale Engine and let people watch? Okay, would it be possible to have several people feed into your service and only pay per usage per feed on an on-demand basis? That saves me from setting up my own servers, managing all, and scaling and all that boring stuff. So essentially what he's, I think, really asking is, how do I scale from a Raspberry Pi to a RTMP streaming server like something at Scale Engine or something like that? And can he do it? What do you think, Alan? Can it be done from a Linux box?
Yes, we have people using FFmpeg to do stuff. I make a couple changes the way he's got it set up. You'd want to send MP4 rather than FLV and make sure your codec is H.264, not like VP6 or something.
Right. That'll just look better too.
Yes, it'll look better and so on. But also it means it will actually play on an iPhone or iPad that way.
Or an Android device.
Yes. So when they send us that one RTMP stream, we repacketize that, and they can view it in over RTMP HLS, which is for mobile devices like iPhones and so on, and RTSB, which is your legacy type, which is how people watch the Linux Action Show on different devices. So yes, we can do that.
So FFmpeg has built-in RTMP streaming support now?
I've had it for a long time.
Yeah, okay. So I could take a Raspberry Pi and I could put a VLC or some sort of playlist on there, and I could just have that be a dedicated reruns machine, right?
Yes, although separately, Scale Engine has a rerun system now.
Well, there's that. That sounds even easier.
If you take the stuff you've already uploaded to us, since it's already on our hard drive, right? And you just add it to a playlist and say, at this time, start playing, and then play this one, and then this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. And when you get to the end, loop.
That's fancy.
Or you can, schedule the stuff and then say, next week, play this playlist.
Right.
It's still in beta. We're working on it, but it's pretty amazing. It's a little expensive, but...
Oh. Well, there's that.
Well,
all right.
It wouldn't be for you, but if other people wanted it.
Oh.
The minimum is $100 a month.
Okay. So we're going to now, we have one kind of like semi-Scale Engine question, and then we're going to transition into a lot of the privacy questions we got, I think.
Yes.
This one comes in, it's just kind of like a general, for the longtime TechSNAP fans who may have wondered this. He says, first off, I want to congratulate you on your show, which is awesome. Well, thank you, Francisco. I'm suffering from a TechSNAP binge since I discovered your show last couple of weeks ago. I've had some trouble viewing on YouTube. He's saying he's having some problems with YouTube's playlist feature. Understandable. So he decided to start watching the videos on the website. He says, if it's more convenient for you, what should users choose? Should I choose the torrent rather than the direct downloads or streaming from your site? Does the torrent distribution technology save you some bucks at the end of the month for bandwidth usage as opposed to deliver the content yourself? Thanks. And he's in Chile. So yeah, the
torrent save Chris money, and everything else.
Yeah, and the great thing about the torrents. So every episode of TechSNAP, and really all the shows now, has a torrent feed available. There's RSS feeds generated from BitLove, and you'll find links for that in the show notes. And then for TechSNAP and a couple other of the shows, I have direct torrent file downloads for the HD version. And if you grab that, you defray the cost because you're distributing the bandwidth. And the nice thing about the way we have it set up is the torrents all have a web seed to the master file. So if for some reason you come, say you come in a month after an episode's out, maybe nobody's torrenting it at the time, it'll just pull down from a web seed as fast as the latest.
Which is the same way as downloading it. Yeah. It's the same as downloading it directly over HTTP, except for when it's available, bandwidth gets offset by peers.
The only
which is really, that is exactly the setup that BitTorrent was originally designed for.
It works awesome, right?
Right. It was designed for, instead of just everybody hammering the website, everybody download from the website, but offload as much as they can to each other.
And what's cool is you combine that with torrent clients that support RSS feeds, and then TechSNAP fans out there can just have, or LAS or whatever, or all our shows, they can have the feeds in the feeder, and then as soon as it hits the RSS feed, they just start torrenting and seeding it for everybody. I'm a little unsure. I'm pretty sure actually that our tracking doesn't work very well for torrents. So if somebody hits the web seed, I might record that hit, maybe.
So
yeah.
Well, the part of the problem there is the torrent client will hit the web seed for small chunks at a time.
Yeah. But
So
PodTrack only counts at once.
Okay. Because, basically they keep hitting it over and over and over and over again, asking for like half a megabyte at a time.
Yeah. No, PodTracks are real stingent about that. But if they don't ever hit the web seed, then we never see it in the numbers tracking. Which if it's probably only a few thousand an episode, so it's not really a big deal for us.
But wouldn't it make more sense to use PodTrack on the .torrent file?
They don't support
that way. They don't?
Yeah, they're redirector
It's just
breaks.
a redirect.
I know. Well, they specifically are filtering now on the extension. When we first started using torrents, they did. It did work. And then it switched one time, and then everything that used the redirect quit working.
They're goofy.
Yeah, remember they do it through an IIS server too when we were troubleshooting it that one time? Yeah, so... Yeah. All right. So here we go. Let's start with some of the privacy stuff. This was a hot topic this week. I wonder why. So this one came in from Jacob Broker, and he said, this is the argument for OwnCloud. With the NSA snooping going on and Google complying with FISA requests under a gag order, all of this only increases the argument for self-hosted OwnCloud instance. They have a beta for server-side encryption in their latest version, and I'd love to hear Alan discuss the overall security issues with the software. Will Scale Engine be selling space for OwnCloud instances soon? Now, obviously, you haven't had time to audit the OwnCloud code, but I thought maybe we could discuss...
I don't even know what it would take for Scale Engine to sell OwnCloud space.
It's not very demanding. You can, if you have like, I think it's, I don't know, man, it's like a 5-minute install if you have all the requirements. It's super quick. But I think maybe we could just talk in general about steps you could do to secure yourself on anything, OwnCloud.
The first part is, where is the OwnCloud living? Is it at your house or are you renting space somewhere? Because once you're renting space somewhere, technically the government could go to that provider with FISA warrant or whatever and say, we want access to everything that's there. And also there's a gag order. You can't tell the customer that you're doing this.
Yeah. I mean, honestly...
That would make the argument for locating that OwnCloud outside of the country where that warrant won't work.
Like a Canadian-based CDN company?
But also that means that once you're communicating outside the country, the government maybe is watching that more closely
very
than
good
if
point,
you're staying inside the country.
I'll tell you though, if I honestly I wish I had 3 or 4 just VMs I could just bang on living on the Scale Engine servers, because to me, I don't trust pretty much anybody else. So, I mean, even if you got to of course, you being outside the U.S., you're right. So as long as I was safe and encrypted everything, then maybe something outside the U.S. would be a good idea. But I bet every time a packet crosses the border, it's getting scooped up.
Probably not every packet.
I don't know.
The amount of data is just immense.
Well, so we went into this on Filter based on NSA.
Do they bother recording pings? Because how many pings go across?
Well, I don't want to give away all of what we covered in Filter, but basically we had an NSA leaker and a couple of different things that basically, so the damn program's name is Prism, right? The reason why it's called Prism is because they're actually splitting the light signal of the fiber optics in these telco rooms, and so what they're collecting everything temporarily, and then they're just discarding stuff that doesn't catch the keywords supposedly. So yeah, they could be pulling it all in certain locations. They could be taking it all and then dropping a lot of it. I don't know.
There's not much point in them recording the SSL stuff, I don't think.
Right, yeah.
And so on. So if you only communicate with your own cloud over SSL, then it's not as bad.
Reddit is currently under heavy... Oh, there it goes. All right, so here's the next question, kind of along the same line. Securing OwnCloud. Chris and Alan, I've got an OwnCloud 506 instance running on a shared hosting provider. I'd like your opinion on how secure it is. I've set up so that other users can connect using HTTPS, and the users have realistically long passwords with numbers and characters, etc. What sort of data would you consider too sensitive to post, and what steps can be taken to make it more secure? Thanks for the show, Jacob. Shared hosting provider.
If you want it secure, it shouldn't be shared with anything. Right? But I don't know. It really depends on a lot.
I would say what I would not probably data-wise store on a shared hosting provider I'd go as far as say copyrighted material. I wouldn't store, if you've backed up a movie, I wouldn't put it up there.
I wouldn't store anything I didn't want someone else to be able to see.
Right.
Right? Because it's a shared server. That means that if some other customer installs some buggy piece of software and doesn't patch it, or even an old version of OwnCloud and doesn't patch it, then that server can get rooted, and then some random person has root access and can view all your stuff. And that's why I would say you definitely would want to avoid shared anything if you're worried about security. Yeah, it's more expensive to get dedicated, but that's the trade-off. It's like you might not need that much security, but if you want that much security, that's how it is.
So what if he's got this OwnCloud encryption plugin, so all of the OwnCloud data is encrypted, the communications to the OwnCloud server are encrypted? You feel better about that?
If the communications are encrypted, but someone else has root on the box, then they can get it after it's decrypted before it's stored on the disk or whatever, right?
Right. So you have to ask yourself, are you worried about that happening? And you got to remember, if it's a shared box, say maybe with even
or rather,
if it's just 20...
if it's depending on your transport encryption, if it's SSL, if someone else has root on the box, they can read your SSL private key and decrypt all your traffic.
And all they have to do is really compromise one of the other customers on the account, maybe or take advantage of some Plesk bug that we're going to talk about in the roundup.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or anything like that. And once they have root on your box, then they can read your SSL keys and decrypt all your traffic. Or, if OwnCloud is encrypting your files, what's it encrypting them with? There's a key, and that key sits on the OwnCloud server. So if someone compromises the OwnCloud server, they get the key. Right?
Yeah, it seems like OwnCloud, I totally see where he's coming from, because when I started playing with it, my thought was, man, I'd like to have
If I was going to build a secure OwnCloud, it would be the disk. On top of that, FreeBSD's GELI, G-E-L-I encryption system.
Okay.
And then ZFS sitting on top of that. And then with snapshots and stuff, and you could do all the fun stuff. But basically, it would be the partition or whatever that was going to hold the OwnCloud data would be encrypted, and a base OS would boot up, and every time it rebooted, I would have to manually enter the password and re-enable the OwnCloud, or remount the OwnCloud encrypted partition. And that way, if, somebody reboots the box, or if the government, say, seizes the machine and, takes it away, then they need the password to remount it, and you don't.
Would you throw it up on a box it's in a scale engine data center, or would you run it at home?
Depends what it was for. If it was only for the stuff that's already at my house, there's no sense pushing it out to the internet necessarily. But with the GELI encryption and stuff, I would trust it to sit somewhere else. As long as, using FreeBSD's audit framework and everything, if I know for sure that no one else has access to this box and no one else can read or has my encryption keys.
All right. There you go. So I think
it basically comes down to knowing that no one else has access to anything.
I mean, I totally understand the want to have your own cloud server outside the house, especially if you want to be able to get access to it using the mobile apps, and maybe you have a bunch of people you're working with. Like, I've thought about setting up a Jupiter Broadcasting own cloud and saying, F you, Google Docs, see you later, pro. And then say, okay, everybody start using this. But I'd much rather have, if I'm going to do it, I want to have it on my home network. Not only is it better performance, but I really know who can see what I'm doing there. I mean, you just have absolute certainty.
Well, you have fast enough internet at home where things like Google Docs and small files wouldn't be killing your internet either.
No, not.
Where most people don't have enough upload at home to be able to do things like that. But you and I happen to have reasonable amounts of upstream.
Yeah, I could almost have my whole media collection outside the house if I wasn't worried about going to jail. And also then there's a practical matter of that much data being stored somewhere. All right. So now we're going to go even further down the privacy rabbit hole. The next discussion thread comes from Fergicaldelius. That's pretty much how you say it. It says, how do you retain some semblance of privacy on the internet? In light of proof that came out this week regarding the spying, we all speculate it was already happening. How do you keep some semblance of privacy with all of your data? And so this obviously kind of along the same thread here. What precautions do you take on for encryption?
The very first thing is I never assumed that anything I sent unencrypted over the internet wasn't able to be monitored by somebody if they wanted to.
Right.
I didn't necessarily assume that it was actually being monitored, but I always knew if I wasn't sending it over like SSL, then someone could be reading it.
So this is what you're doing is you live a security. This sounds kind of stupid now. I'm going to say it out loud, but you live a secure lifestyle. Like you think you like you don't diet. You just live healthy, right? You eat healthy for your whole life. It's not a diet. It's the way you eat. Just same with your security. Right. You're not like you don't just like practice security. You live security. So you operate forever under the assumption that you're always being watched, and then you just always take precautions.
And then you may not necessarily. You make the decision on the trade-off, right? Security is always a trade-off between, convenience and usability and security. Yeah. And so for some things, I decide I'd rather have the ease of use, and I just won't have the security.
Yeah.
Or I will have this level of security because that's good enough without compromising my usability.
And I think that's at the core. I think that's how a lot of people treat it. And I think just the confirmation that this spying is happening, that line has just moved for a lot of people. I think that line has just been moved, where you were already on the other side of that line for a while.
Well, I don't do anything particularly paranoid, honestly. I
find myself starting to worry.
I just don't make assumptions that things are secure.
I'm starting to worry, like when I'm Googling for certain things, like to research for unfiltered or just whatever, I kind of go, I'm going to go over to DuckDuckGo and do this, because I'm starting to kind of get a little, and like I said, I'm worried about all the emails from people outside the U.S. I am starting to worry a little bit.
Right, so I'm doing the search at DuckDuckGo doesn't make a difference.
Well, not if they're getting all the traffic.
Google won't keep track of the fact that you made that search or whatever.
Oh, they do. But I turn on search history.
Right, my Google search history is on. Right, so if you go to DuckDuckGo, they're not going to record that, but this doesn't stop the government from necessarily knowing that you made that search.
Especially it depends on if they're capturing it, at the line level, it really doesn't matter.
Well, if they're capturing it at the line level, then as long as you go to DuckDuckGo or Google over HTTPS, then less of an issue.
So encryption in the email and things like that, is it time?
Depends. You can only encrypt the email to people who you have their key. Right. And I still have never seen a good solution for GPG on a cell phone.
Yeah. Oh, jeez. I didn't even, yeah.
But as a middle ground, every email that comes from the Scale Engine help desk is cryptographically signed with our GPG key. It's not encrypted, but it's signed so that you know it's actually from us.
Yeah.
Although that confuses some people who use like Windows Live Mail, because our emails show up as an attachment because of the way it's MIME signed. Because Microsoft's email client breaks the email RFC because it's Microsoft and that's what they do. Yes, we have a couple of customers complaining your emails show up as attachments. It's like, well,
yeah, that drives me crazy.
Signed.
I also
get a better email client and that'll go away.
I also think of just start thinking of ways. So anything that's peer-to-peer is going to be a safer system generally than something that's controlled by a large company. Not always, but there's
there's a difference between controlled by a large company and just not peer-to-peer.
Well, what I mean is and I should probably preface this differently. What I mean is okay, if I'm using Google Chat, the federal government can go to Google and subpoena the records of who I chatted with and when I chatted with, even if they can't subpoena the contents of it, or maybe they can if I'm not using encryption. However, if I'm using BitMessage, which is peer-to-peer, there's no Google to go to subpoena any records. So think of that kind of thing, too.
But is there something wrong with BitMessage where some third person in the cloud could also read your message? Yeah, or intercept your message or impersonate you.
I guess what I'm saying is there is sort of like the encryption and the protocol security, but then there's also the practical IT administration side where somebody can just come and get the record.
It depends what you consider P2P. Technically, Skype is P2P.
Right. Well, I would not count. No, I wouldn't.
Skype, right?
I'm talking because Skype's. When I say P, I mean not controlled or owned or operated by a company.
Well, see, that's different than P2P.
Right. I'm just saying things like BitTorrent sync and those types of things. Like for example, I'm transitioning. I have a client that I send these really large video files to. And I'm just doing it all over, out of the box. We're not even going to go Dropbox. We're just going BitTorrent sync, right? Just boom, right out of the box. Anything like that, where I feel like...
Right, but that's still orchestrated by BitTorrent.com, which is a company, right?
They have zero view of... Because the connection between my client and I...
They tell you they have zero.
Well, people have been watching it. It looks legit.
Right. But it depends
but for example, whereas Dropbox, we know what the situation is there, right? I mean, that to me seems like even if all the communications is encrypted and everybody uses good passwords and nobody compromises the Dropbox client, at the end of the day, The Dropbox Corporation still has a single key to unlock everyone's files on request.
Right.
Whereas nobody's going to be able to do that with BitTorrent Sync.
You keep saying that, but who says that? How do you know that it's not?
It's the way the system works. You have to have
Well, it's not open source, so you can't tell the way the system works.
Well, the client isn't open source, but the whole back end is open source. All the way the whole sync system works. The client is just one of many clients. Just like there's many torrent clients, right? uTorrent is closed source, but you can use any torrent client. It's the same thing. So the BitTorrent Sync protocol is open source.
Encryption is actually happening. Right,
There's Gibson did a security now on it, and he gave it a pretty good thumbs up as far as the encryption goes. And I'm not saying there might not be something that comes along later. Like I've played with AeroFS and not Spider Oak, but there's like another one is another all Dropbox alternative. But I say you just kind of have to be. Not only do you have to think about how the encryption works and how the protocol works, but you also have to think about how the company that's operating it works. That's my point.
Right, but if there's any entity behind it, government can force them to do things.
Yeah.
Now, the government, it's easier for the government to target the bigger ones.
Yeah, open source makes me feel better, right? Because if it's open source, then...
Yes. But again, if not all of it's open source, then...
Yeah. Yeah, I would prefer to have the BitTorrent Sync front end. I'm sure eventually somebody will come along and release like a good new BitTorrent Sync.
The front end is where they claim that the encryption happens, right?
I don't want probably. I would assume that's where the encryption happens.
Right, because it's not much use unless the encryption happens before it leaves your computer.
But you see
if it's happening in the proprietary app there, how do you know that it's encrypting only to your key?
What they say is that it's documented. They have the way the encryption according to the documentation is done is the two of you agree upon a shared key, and then that shared key is a seed for the encryption that seeds some other key based on that shared key. And then everything's encrypted against that. So as long as you two only have that seed,
unless you can examine the source code to see, how do you know that they're not also encrypting it to a master key like Dropbox does?
But in theory, if they're not doing that, then there's no way to get access to it.
But unless you can prove that they're not doing that, you have to assume that they are.
But I can prove that Dropbox can. Right. So if I have to choose between the two, I'm going to go with the one that I'm not going to go with the one that has documented proof and has admitted to having access to it.
But
the other thing is there's hundreds of people in the open source community right now working around. I mean, it's taking off like wildfire. A lot of people are looking at it. Whereas with Dropbox, there's no eyes on any part of the infrastructure code there. So there's also more visibility on the BitTorrent Sync side. But it could be something else, right? It could be Spider Oak or I don't know, whatever, Junglebox or Jungle Disk.
If you're really concerned about it, you encrypt the files manually before you sync them.
Before you put them in there. Yeah, you could do Dropbox that way too. So I guess that's the other thing is maybe look at using encryption before you use things like Gmail or Dropbox or Google Drive. And then just keep using them and just remember that they can, see your encrypted files, but they can't get to them.
Yep.
Then you have to worry, are they tracking who you're talking to as well, if you're worried about that.
Right. And that's the other thing with, with P2P stuff, there's like, with our Skype, unless we're being wiretapped where the connection gets routed through Microsoft server or through the government server or whatever, we have a direct connection between us.
Yeah.
And so, the metadata would show that direct connection between us.
Good times. All right.
And so how do you avoid that? And, things like Tor are really the only way to do that.
I agree. So the chat room's kind of agreeing with us. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Just encrypt before you put everything in there. It's just such a hassle, but you got to just decide, maybe categorize your data.
Security is always that. It's always this sliding bar between easy to use but not safe and a giant hassle but safe.
Yeah, it
is. You're just deciding where on that slider you want to fall for that specific item.
Yeah, and you just got to make a judgment call based on what it is.
Some stuff's just not worth it, right? It's like, this document I wrote that doesn't say anything incriminating, and I publicly published it, so I don't need much encryption on that.
That's honestly why I've always used Dropbox for like our production files, because I'm like, well, I don't care if they get the TechSNAP intro, right? I mean, I put that on the web every week, but then there's some stuff, like even when it's not, I don't know. I just I think about I would love to use Dropbox to back up certain things that I'm not willing to put in there right now. And I've made that decision for Dropbox. I just don't use it for those things. So yeah, it's a little self-control, a little change of behavior.
Too big of a pain to encrypt this stuff. And the biggest thing with encryption is key management.
Yeah.
Because if you lose the key, you can't decrypt it, and now your backup is useless.
Yeah, yeah.
Or if someone else gets the key, now they can read your backup, and that's not what you want, and so on. So it all comes down to these practices and stuff. And it's like
Needs DNA samples.
You need to back up the key, right? You want to have more than one copy of your encryption key, so that you reformat your computer or whatever, you can still have the key. But you need to store these in such a way that somebody else can't get them.
I like that in Star Trek, it's all voice print recognition. Computer recognize authorization Picard Alpha 115759. Engage. And if I could just sit down on my computer and do that, that'd be awesome. And the computer would be like, I detect stress in your voice. Are you under duress? And I'm like, no.
Well, also, what about, if somebody just records that and plays it back?
Right, yeah, I know. Silly Star Trek. Maybe it's doing bioscans at the same time. We just don't know it.
Yeah, and well, the problem with the Star Trek one was always, you're saying your password out loud.
And then it displays it on the screen in clear text, too. And it's like, the destruct password is 0010 destruct or something like that. Really?
It's like, yes, somebody picked a lame password.
Yeah.
But basically, it goes back to the episode where Data uses Picard's voice and spits out this really long password, or changes Picard's password to this really long password.
And takes over the whole ship. Locks it all down.
Yes.
Yeah, that was awesome.
With voice prints and a lot of other things like that.
All because he had a bad filling. All right, well, let's get to James, because James has got a good recommendation for those of us who are struggling with keeping these long passwords on mobile. It's been a going trend for a couple episodes. He says, hey guys, one more point on the continuing saga of password database apps on Android. I use KeePass, and the Android app is great. When you view an entry, it adds the item notification bar for the username and one for the password. Tap the notification from any app, and its entry gets copied to the clipboard. Then your clipboard gets automatically cleared after a configurable timeout, and your database also gets locked after a separately configurable timeout. Works great, and is about as secure as you can get on mobile. One more point about clipboard monitoring. I think once the attacker is on your machine, all bets are off anyways. They could even just keylog your master password and steal the database file. I don't think the clipboard is much less secure than anything else that's in your machine's RAM. That's a fair point. I didn't know that KeePass. I like the idea of you go into KeePass, you get the login and password, then you switch back to the app you want, and it gives you access to them in the slide down notification area. That is slick. Mm-hmm. LastPass doesn't do that, as far as I know. If it does, I should start doing that. Yeah. And then one more note on the clipboard before we move on now for the desktop. Vertident, whatever. Awesome dude. Submitted this 6 days ago in the subreddit. It says, for the paranoid, you can use xclip-selection clipboard blank as a cron job to run every couple of minutes. No more leaving your password on your clipboard ever. It just blanks out your clipboard for you.
There are some apps like, I think somebody was saying KeePass or LastPass, where after you copy the password to your clipboard, it clears it after like 60 seconds or something.
Yeah, we got an email about that. Both LastPass and KeePass do that on the desktop. As far as I can tell, I'm trying to think if I've only done this on my iPad. No, the password doesn't clear on the mobile version for LastPass, so KeePass might have a leg up there. Brian writes in, hey, what about good things from hackers? I love the show. In fact, I watch and or listen to Last Coded Radio, SciByte, and The Faux Show weekly, just beyond TechSNAP, so keep up the great work. I hear you guys weekly talk about all of those exploits and the processes that the programmer goes through in order to get whatever it is they're after. And this last episode got me wondering if these guys are using well-known techniques for programming this stuff, or is there possibly something good that can come from their malfeasance? Alan spoke about an exploit existing in memory only, and that it appeared to only have been modified from previous versions that had to modify the binary. So I'm wondering if these revisions and exploits offer the OS world insights to new techniques, better methods, etc., beyond just patching a hole and help to defend us better. Oh, that's interesting. Maybe using it for patching. Feel free to answer on air or an email. In regards, and links are always welcome. Thanks, Brian. So I think he's saying, could OS vendors learn from attackers and maybe make their operating system more secure on the fly? You think that's what he's asking?
Well, he was asking about, is there this evolutionary process similar to open source? Part of it is that some of these exploits are actually open source.
Right. Or floating around.
Yeah. Although I didn't imply a connection, and I think he assumed I did, between like the Dark Leech Apache malware and the one that Hetzner saw. I don't have enough detail about the Hetzner one to tell how much different it actually was from the CDorked and Dark Leech, and whether it was actually not modifying the file system or not. They say it didn't, but I have half a page from them, not detailed research like I said.
Right, yeah.
Remember, ESET had like pages and pages and pages about CDorked stuff.
Yeah.
So it'd be really nice if, Hetzner called up ESET and said, hey, come look at this. But something like being able to patch a binary while it's running might be interesting, although a lot of server stuff has abilities like that. Like the Nginx web server has an upgrade command, which is similar to the way you do a graceful restart, like to reload the config without disconnecting any users.
Yeah.
Except for it upgrades the binary without disconnecting anybody or interrupting anybody. Basically, any requests that are currently being processed continue to be processed off the old binary, but any new incoming requests are processed by the new binary until eventually all the old ones have gone away. So that's basically a type of rolling restart and allows you to do that without having to patch it in memory. Although, we've talked a bit before about different technologies for like doing a kernel upgrade without rebooting.
Yeah.
Like I think it was called K-Splice, right?
Yep.
And things like that. But
good memory.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's in Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Thanks, Sword.
Well, Oracle owns K-Splice now, don't they?
I like the name.
Pretty sure.
Sounds like a refreshing beverage.
But yeah, good things can come from hackers, yes. And that's part of the whole idea of full disclosure and
exactly.
The real hacker ethos is that information is meant to be free and things like that.
Yep.
It's not necessarily about defacing websites and stuff. It's about getting information like.
Yeah, the website defacing stuff is just a bunch of pranksters,
Yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, we often talk about the exploits that happen and like he was mentioning, the very interesting steps people take to get through to break into things. And the reason we do that is because yes, we as the system is responsible for securing systems can learn a lot from looking at the steps that the attackers have gone through before, so we can try to add roadblocks to those. Right.
Absolutely.
And defense in depth ensures that.
You could watch this show and tell your boss you're thinking about and learning about defense in depth, because we're like a meta filter for all of the really interesting stories out there, and then we bring them to you, and then you can put them in your brain and compute on them, and then come up with awesome solutions for your boss or client. You're welcome. All right, Alan, I have this will be a story folks will avoid. We haven't done a war story, and Dasani provides us with a little mini backup war story. Get this. Speaking of cloud services, check this out. I have to share a story as a warning, and we haven't had a war story in a while. I had just started volunteering at a place where we discovered a corruption on their main hard drive shared by Windows servers. I'm sorry, a Windows share. Someone attached it both via USB and eSATA at the same time, so Windows corrupted the drive. Doesn't, like in Linux or in Unix, they have UUID on the drive, and the system recognizes, I've seen that before. The good news is that they had an off-site remote backup service. The bad news is that the backup service couldn't recover all the files to their original locations easily. The directory had gotten so nested that they hit the Windows path limit. So the guy says, he says to the backup system, so you created backups of your files you couldn't restore? And the support said yes. They said, then create another VM of Windows Server and restore all of the files inside that VM. Then shared them via Dropbox to us. So the vendor did this. They shared them via Dropbox to us. I even had to do some of the files myself. I got them into the new directory structure, but still, I'm not sure if they have all their files back. I tried to get them over Spider Oak, but it's more expensive than they already have. After this incident, I think they've seen the merit, however. Time will tell. It's if it's in their budget. They've gotten good sense and gotten a new hard drive. It's just in case, it sits in a case with a fan, and it's a C8 Enterprise Edition. I gave them the name of the backup facility. It's not confidential. So I asked him, okay, what is the name of the backup facility? Because, I want to know who these guys are. And he says it was remotedatabackups.com. It's not really their fault. Windows has this this path limitation. And it kind of sounds like they went above and beyond by creating a VM for him and then restoring.
Well, yeah, basically what it sounds like is the directory names that they were trying to back up were too long.
Yeah.
And so when they tried to restore the files to the location on their system, which was already in a bunch of subdirectories, then the resulting path was too long. And so they restored it to a VM in like the root of the drive so the path wouldn't be too long. The question is, how did the files exist if the path was too long?
Yeah, how does that happen? And I've seen that happen before too, but Yeah, I agree. Speaking of war
Because
stories,
even Unix has limits on path lengths and stuff, and because I've run into it with mountain points, with the way ZFS works, right? You have these, you create your Z pool and then you create a bunch of data sets, and I've actually had one that was too long to mount because it included a jail, so it has like a whole jail host name is part of the path too, right? It was like fastcgi 1-24 dot or no, HTML 1-24.fastcgi.html1.scaleengine, right? So it's like this long. And then there's, the Z pool, easy jail, jails, that, and then user local etc scale engine and relate FFE0 / and then an MD5 hash of a file or something. It was a ridiculously long path, but I had to work around that and rename some stuff and, scale engine became SE and relate NR and stuff, and
keep make it a little shorter,
shrinking that path.
Yes. Well, speaking of war stories, Drummond submitted a link, a cross post in our subreddit, just mentioning that there is actually a Reddit sub devoted to tech war stories over at Tales from Tech Support. So it's talesfromtechsupport.reddit.com. If you miss some war stories, I might go through these from time to time and pick out a good one every now and then and read it here on the show.
Yep.
All right, so Alan has some propaganda that he wants us to read about. Switching from Linux to FreeBSD. Can't imagine how this worked in here.
You didn't mention the story.
Oh, there's a story that goes with it? Tell me.
No, sorry. The Tales from Tech Support.
Oh. No,
you didn't mention what it was about.
No, it's a subreddit. It's a subreddit of
collections. He just linked the subreddit. I thought he linked a specific story.
No, he just linked. Okay. I just wanted to mention it in case people wanted to go read it.
Okay, yes.
All right. So tell me about your BSD propaganda.
Oh, this was just... one of my FreeBSD friends on Twitter was like, "Hey, Chris and Alan, you should talk about this."
So this here posted on June 7th from Nilesh Govardhan. Oh boy, it's his blog. He talks about moving over from Linux to. This is
FreeBSD.
This is actually a pretty nice.
So he had a VPS at a host, and he had a bunch of. They were like Gen 2, weren't they? Yeah, he had a bunch of Gen 2 machines.
Yeah.
And he installed one of them as FreeBSD, and he has liked it quite a bit.
Oh, look at him! So there you go. You can read if you're curious, if you're FreeBSD curious.
Yes,
that's a good post.
It's a VPS, so it explains why he was using the regular RAID stuff instead of ZFS, because he probably doesn't have that much memory. But
I am surprised that he would run Gen 2 on a VPS. Seems like you'd spend a lot of time on that VPS building packages, but I don't know. We got a great book recommendation, and I'm a bit of an asshat. I didn't grab his name, who sent it in to us, but it's absolutely applicable to I think what a lot of people are thinking about this week. How to Be Invisible, the 3rd edition, to protect your home, your children, your assets, and your life. It goes into protecting your anonymity online in real life. Good book, and it's $10 on Kindle. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. If you grab that book, it'll be an affiliate link, and you'll support the network. And actually, while I'm talking about affiliates, I'd like to make a plea. Please consider checking your Chrome and Firefox extensions to make sure that they're still active. And also, please consider clicking on the affiliate links at the bottom of our show notes for Father's Day gifts and things like that. I have some in-studio equipment purchases, specifically one that I've already made, and a couple of more that I'm making to upgrade our Skype connections. It's going to be thousands of dollars, so if you're not currently supporting us through our affiliate system, now would be a great time to start, because we'll definitely need the funds to help fund some of the replacements of the gear we need in the studio. So thanks, everybody, using our affiliates, and happy Father's Day to you dads out there. Alan, don't forget Father's Day this Sunday.
Right.
All right. I think that was everything we had for the feedback, wasn't it? Very good.
Yep.
Very good. All right, then with the feedback all done, it is time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup were stories that didn't quite fit at the top of the show, but we still wanted to give you some links to follow up on your own. A lot of these links were sent in by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And heck, go check on them afterwards if we don't give them incomplete coverage. We got a little crap last week because we were too light on the Roundup. It's like, no, that's the point of the Roundup, is to move fast. But if we say something that gets you intrigued, we have everything linked in the show notes. Let's start with one that I think everybody should spend a little time checking out. The EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation.
Very well done.
Yeah, isn't this? They posted a very, very good timeline, honestly, going back to Actually going back to
1791.
Yeah, 1791. But starting, it really gets detailed in the early 2000s of this whole NSA prison program, all of it, the FISA courts, the telco indemnifications, the whistleblower leaks, all of it. I mean, it is awesome. It's very
It covers when the NSA was founded, when the Church Committee investigated the NSA doing illegal domestic spying and, slapped the wrist to the NSA, when FISA was enacted and what that did.
All the Senate hearings have been going on that people haven't really talked about much. It's amazing to see how much activity has actually been going on, all this, and kind of eye-opening that it hasn't gotten more exposure already, because it's obviously been going on for years. So, good timeline. Thank you to the EFF. We'll have a link to that in the show notes.
Yes, they've done a very, very good job with this, looking at it.
Sweden's Data Protection Authority bans Google Cloud services over privacy concerns, Alan.
Yes. So basically the people in charge of privacy in Sweden, which they have a very specific name. What is it? They're the Swedish Data Inspection Board.
Nice.
Has basically prohibited all public sector bodies from using cloud services, including Google Apps, because, specifically, quote, a risk assessment by the board determines that the contract gives Google too much covert discretion over how the data can be used. Right? So if this is a public body that's part of the government, and so therefore it contains a lot of sensitive information about random people in Sweden, Google having the ability to decide to use that data for something else without having to ask permission is not acceptable.
Good for them. Make people aware.
Second quote, the decision may also trigger a disintegration of trust across Europe, specifically with schools and other such services that were using Google Apps.
Speaking of Google, I got an Android story. You ready?
And earlier this year, a Norwegian Data Protection Authority also demanded amendments to the contract with cloud services to, head off the same thing. So rather than just saying you can't use Google, it was like you can only use Google if Google agrees to these amendments to their contract saying, they won't do this and that and the other thing. But that puts Google in an interesting position where they're contractually obligated by the Norwegian government to do this and being forced by the U.S. government to do that.
Right.
And
that's a tough spot.
How do you, And normally it would be, tell the Norwegians, but then the U.S. government has them under this gag order, and it's like, it's very, very muddy.
You can almost call it anti-business. It's hostile to business, Alan.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I got a little ditty on a sophisticated Android Trojan. It's a multifunctional Trojan, as they call it, capable of sending SMS to premium rate numbers, downloading other malware programs and installing them on an affected device, and even sending them to other Android devices via Bluetooth. Yay! Kaspersky Labs is the one talking about this.
Yep.
What I thought was interesting is the creators, it's called backdoor.android.obad, and they found an error in the Android operating system which relates to the processing of the Android manifest.xml file. The file exists in every Android application, is used to describe the application structure, define its launch parameters, etc. The malware modifies Android manifest.xml in such a way that it does not comply with Google standards, but is still correctly processed on a smartphone thanks to the exploitation of the identifier vulnerability. So another vulnerability. All this made it extremely difficult to run dynamic analysis on this Trojan.
Well, the other one they did is they found a bug in the tool researchers used to convert the Android, what's it called, Dalek or whatever, to Java for them to decompile the application, and basically found a bug in the decompiler and exploited it so that their code would be hard to analyze.
Very clever. Also freaky that, you could infect another smartphone via Bluetooth. Like if you both just have Bluetooth.
I think they would have to be paired, but yes.
Yeah, and I'm sure you got to be some kind of promiscuous. I don't know. All right. Researchers claim Wi-Fi
threat you're all kinds of promiscuous.
Yeah. Speaking of mobile devices, iPhone got a little Wi-Fi bug, and like an old Wi-Fi bug too, right?
Yeah, but basically it seems that newer iPhones are still vulnerable to this one where basically a Wi-Fi access point pretends to be a Wi-Fi access point you have seen before, and the iPhone will basically automatically associate to it. And then you can hijack the traffic.
So you'd have to know. It's an AP in its database. But maybe if you went lucky, like Linksys or Starbucks,
Yeah, and things, or I think these guys are specifically from England, and so there's BT, where British Telecom has free Wi-Fi spots set up all over the place, called like BT-Fi or something like that. And so, the chance of somebody not having ever used one of those before is pretty slim. And so you could fake, common names like that, like we were just saying.
This next story in the roundup sounds like I'm talking about something from a sci-fi novel, but it's actually legit. It's a amazing write-up on Wired today from James Bamford. If you're not familiar with James, he's been following the NSA for 3 decades. He's written 3 books on the NSA. He's pretty familiar with the organization, and he just published an amazing piece called The Secret War, Infiltration, Sabotage, Mayhem. For years, 4-star General Keith Alexander, who was just in front of a hearing yesterday, has been building a secret army capable of launching devastating cyber attacks, and now he's ready to unleash hell. Sounds like hyperbole. They actually are assembling cyber armies, and I can't even believe I'm saying this, for offensive purposes only.
Mm-hmm.
And this article talks about
that's been coming for a while now, but
it's here now. It's here, yep. And we're full on in the cyber war now. We're doing cyber war, and it talks about how he's been authorized to cause actual damage with cyber war, and it's a very, very good piece, and it's very timely with all of the NSA stuff that's going on right now.
Yep.
All right, we got a little Oracle story, yes?
Yes, there was a big story. Started a little while back, but was made big headlines in the last couple of weeks. Oracle had made the decision that the time zone definition updates that Java uses would only be sent to people who have a support contract. So anybody using the free Java, which includes a lot of people, especially like server-side stuff, wouldn't get time zone updates anymore. Although, as of yesterday, Oracle has finally reversed their position on that, and they were going to continue to offer free time zone definition updates. Now, it might not seem like that big of a thing, but the time zones actually changed quite a bit, especially in the last couple of years. A number of years ago, the U.S. changed when their daylight savings time started and ended, and so that caused Canada to change ours, and then Australia changed theirs, and a bunch of other places have changed, and with governments changing in places like Egypt and so on in the Middle East, their time zones might change. Like they might decide to do away with DST or start with DST again and things like that. So yeah, these updates come out every once in a while, and there's always a change. So
yeah.
I remember reading in the comments of one of the posts when Oracle was withdrawing support for these free updates. Was a company, something to do at an airport, and so it's very imperative that they actually have the right time at all these different airports. And they built their app on Java, but they didn't have a support contract because they didn't need it, right? They're just building an app on top of Java.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, they weren't going to have accurate time information anymore. And that was going to be basically kill their business. And it's kind of the problem with building your business on top of this infrastructure that Oracle just decides to pull it up from underneath you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I was just reading the chat room. They say in the chat room, I feel like Oracle's a cancer on the IT world. Is that putting it too hard? Is that too strong?
Not necessarily. Especially when they do shit like that. Oh, yeah, no more time zone updates unless you pay us. That is what we call a dick move.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, I want to talk about this interesting story. It kind of involves, I think, some stories we've covered in the past. Bring it all together. Google uncovers a phishing campaign targeting Iranians. And what's interesting about this is it appears to be related around Iranian elections. The web giant identified a significant jump in overall volume of phishing activity in the region in the past 3 weeks, originating from within the country. This is, of course, according to Google's vice president of security engineering. He noted in a company blog post on Wednesday that timing and targeting of the campaign suggested political motivation ahead of Friday's election. He went on to say, our Chrome browser previously helped detect what appears to be the same group using SSL certificates to conduct attacks targeted users in Iran. In this case, the phishing technique we detected is more routine. Users receive an email containing a link to a web page that purports to provide them with a way to perform account maintenance. The user clicks the link and then sees a fake Google sign-in page that will steal their username and password. They're using some built-in security features in Chrome for users that have Chrome to help detect this. Yep. Now they talk about using stolen
Google's
SSL servers
and stuff. Oh well, yeah, because remember, it was Google that discovered the
Right.
fake Google SSL certs
Right.
because of the way their Chrome browser works.
Yep. So it's interesting. They're still out there being used.
No, they're saying it appears to be the same people, just they're not using a fake SSL certificate. They're just doing a regular phishing scam and sending people to a fake Google login page to steal their Google password.
Oh, the Business Cider link isn't working for me. What's our next one, Alan? The
It's
data
not
center,
working?
the NSA data center pictures.
Did you get it to open?
Yeah, it just loaded up the second when I hit reload. Cool.
Yes, I had a problem the first time it sent me to the front page, and I had to go back.
Same thing.
Their ad
Yep.
actually breaks everything.
Yep.
Which is, great.
It shows how pathetic and old school they are. It's cool. So these guys got some of the most close-up pictures we've seen. A Fox News reporter did a flyover in the helicopter. I think it was an airplane or something of this data center, and the FBI tracked down the manufacturer of the plane, and then by tracking down the manufacturer of the plane, tracked down the pilot, and then by tracking down the pilot, then tracked down the Fox News reporter and said, "What the hell were you doing flying over our data center?" They weren't happy about that. This thing is so massive, Alan, it's going to have little mini lakes for cooling purposes. It pulls enough power a day to power 65,000 homes.
Right. Well, I don't know how much the data center I'm at pulls exactly. I know it has 4 megawatts of generator capacity. It has an underground well that it uses for the cooling instead of lakes. But,
5
they're in
zettabytes of
Utah.
storage, Alan. How about that?
The Fox News report says as much as 5 zettabytes,
Yeah.
although we don't know for sure.
Right.
But yes, a zettabyte is a billion terabytes
Yeah.
or a trillion gigabytes.
An NSA whistleblower estimates that it is enough storage, and this is what he said, to store the world's communication for 100 years. He said all of the world's communications for 100 years.
No.
That seems, yeah.
They say they can store a year's worth of all internet traffic, which
Right.
is estimated to be about 966 exabytes per year by 2015. So, yeah, they could store a couple of years worth of all the traffic on the internet.
This is why I'm proud to be an American, because we have the best schools, the best bridges, everything is that we don't need to. We've got so much money. I'm really glad that we can do this, because if we were broke, this would look really bad and ridiculous. But since we're not, it's all good.
Yeah. They also have a nice graph here that shows how the network is laid out and how data flows through the NSA data center.
Mm-hmm.
It's data comes in from satellites where they're, intercepting it from other stuff or whatever, and goes through their aerospace facilities, and then that feeds into the data center. They also have Fort Gordon in Australia where they capture data and send that in. There's a outpost in Texas and another one in Hawaii. They have their domestic listening posts inside the states, and then their overseas listening posts, right? They have, there's a bunch along the border between Iraq and Kuwait and a bunch of other places. And those all capture all the radio signals and stuff, and they send those back. Then everything in Utah goes into this big data center, and then the multi-program research facility in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, accesses that data and analyzes it.
Yeah, they don't do the actual analysis there. They say we ran an NPR report in last night's Unfiltered episode 54. They go into some of the details. The other thing the report mentions is they're building a second data center. This is not.
Yes,
They're not done.
I have the second link in a second.
Oh, okay.
So the NSA is building a second data center at Fort Meade, which is where their headquarters is.
Right.
And then that eventually feeds the White House, the CIA, the Pentagon, et cetera, et cetera.
So good news, everybody. More data centers coming, although it's cheaper. This one's only.
But they have this. That one's only
$860.
About half the price of the current one.
Yeah.
But they also have this little graph here that shows citizens' data, like internet searches, browsing history, downloads, emails, SMS, mobile data, social media, credit and debit card transactions, surveillance cameras, commuter records and GPS information, and your medical information. It's all collected and fed into the Utah data center, where it is analyzed and referenced, matched, stored, and shared, and then they decide to act, which then, operational applications they can decide to do with this data is surveillance and monitoring, suspicious activity reporting, which is basically how they flag you for, want the FBI to take a look or whatever. Terrorist screening center alert, and also the Patriot Act detention, where they can just arrest you and hold you indefinitely.
Should I be concerned that they don't have do nothing and just delete on this list? How come all of those lead to bad things?
It reminds me, well, no, this is things they might decide to do.
Yeah,
but
I
yeah,
know,
it reminds me of a quote from one of my favorite authors, who's a tech guy, Michael Lucas. He's like, it's cheaper to buy more storage than it is to decide what is safe to delete.
Right. Yes.
Now, that I don't mean to apply that to the NSA. I just mean
That's what it is.
That's the policy I've adopted at home. It's cheaper to just buy more hard drives than to decide whether it's safe to delete that or not.
And the other argument, the other argument that I worry about on this data center is how depending on how and what they store, because maybe they take everything in and they only store some things or whatever, but eventually the computers will be better at sifting through vaster amounts of data. What we look at now is like, oh, it's so much data. Oh, it's so much. Come on. Think 5 years from now. Think 10 years from now. The computer capacity will be much better at handling these large sets of data, and so they can do even more great things down the road. But
really, it's what Bruce Schneier says is that collecting all this data is just a distraction. You know, it's not actually going to have positive outcomes.
Right. Like they're claiming, for example,
they're going to have all this data and spend all their time trying to find patterns and they're going to miss the obvious things that they would have got if they just didn't bother collecting all this data.
Like the Boston bombings. I mean, those happened during this data collection, right? So the Ricin letters, those were mailed out during this data collection in just the last few months. So It doesn't seem to be that effective. And the bombing plot that they claim it's already collected, well, it turns out they're also being followed by traditional police investigators for several months before they pulled the trigger. So it wasn't all from online surveillance. What this is, though, is this is just full out in front. We are monitoring your medical records. We are monitoring your financial transactions. We are monitoring your phone calls. And we are monitoring your internet traffic. How much more of a surveillance? You cannot get to any more of a surveillance state. There is nothing else left to do other than put boxes in your home.
Yes, 1984, your TV is watching you.
The Xbox One. What do you think, as a Canadian? Are you sitting up there thinking these Americans are losing it down there? That place is falling apart. What is your take from afar?
Well, I happen to know, intelligence agencies in Canada and the UK and so on cooperate very closely with American intelligence agencies.
Yeah. Do you think it's happening to you too?
Probably not to the same scale, but some of it is, yes.
I mean, you would almost think the Canadians would just be reasonable enough not to just waste money like this. It almost just comes down to a fiscal thing where think about the money.
We have this current government that's more American style than we've ever had before. It's a very bad thing. So blame all the people that live in Alberta for it.
I don't know. I go through waves where I'm not too worried about it because I really am not doing.
Apparently they have 60 diesel-fueled emergency standby generators.
Yeah, they have their own power substation.
Yes, but they have 60 generators with enough fuel on hand to run for 3 days at 100% backup power. And I'm guessing if the outage went longer than that, they could turn some of the stuff off. But 3 days doesn't seem like all that much. If you remember, during Sandy, the Pier 1 guys carried fuel upstairs to keep their things running.
Right. Yeah. No.
But
totally.
Also, I would imagine that these guys would have kind of priority access to additional fuel from like the national emergency reserves and so on. The other interesting thing was when I was reading the next story, the second link here, datacenterknowledge.com has their link about the NSA data center in Maryland. One of the most interesting things about the one they're building at Fort Meade is the fact of who is building it, right? Oftentimes when the government builds something, they hire a regular construction contractor to build it, right?
Yeah, sure.
Well, this is the NSA. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is building the High Performance Computing Center number 2.
I guess that's for security purposes, right?
Possibly.
Maybe
make sure that the blueprints aren't on record at some architect firm or something.
Right. Exactly. So maybe they're just.
But apparently, the smaller facility in Fort Meade will support 60 megawatts of power capacity and have both air-cooled and liquid-cooled equipment.
I liked it better when the U.S. government didn't get computers and they didn't get data centers and they didn't get cloud computing. That was the U.S. government I liked. Can we go back to that U.S.
The
government?
project is part of the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative.
So it's just this show has documented we are witnessing in our lifetimes the establishment of the, and I hate to say it, cyber military industrial complex. We are witnessing the establishment of it right now in our times, and future generations will now live under a fully armed cyber whatever. I mean, that is our future now. And we've witnessed it happen. We've gone from a beautiful, innocent, free internet to one that's now going to be dominated by state superpowers that are attacking each other over the internet. And meanwhile, us our regular internet citizens, we just have to sit by and watch it all happen.
Interesting related links I just found. They have an article here from 2007 when the NSA was planning their San Antonio data center, which I'm quite sure is up and running now. And then they have another one here from 2006 where the National Security Agency's technology infrastructure at Fort Meade has actually maxed out the electrical capacity of the Baltimore area power grid.
That was in 2006.
Yes, so they've been running a lot of computers for quite a while.
Well, I feel safer already.
So yeah, basically they've been filling these data centers with monitoring equipment for that long. We just didn't make the connection necessarily.
Yeah. Wow, Alan.
We hear a news story about how the NSA is using a lot of electricity. I guess nobody bothered to ask for what.
I want to give one last plug. Go listen to Unfilter 54. We really dug into Prism. I'm really happy with what we were able to figure out at this point. Watching this album from a technical standpoint, however they're doing this, it's got to be pretty impressive. Like, I bet the data sets that they're dealing with are, like, astronomical. Like, the kind of stuff that they're seeing, the kind of stuff that they're having to manage, it sounds almost like I can't even picture having to deal with data sets that large.
Yep.
Crazy stuff.
Well, it might explain why Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories was so worried about porting ZFS to run on Linux.
Oh. You gotta have a file system to store some of this stuff. Yeah, I wonder what technologies they've had to invent just to make this work, to make this scale. Yeah. And what big fat... I bet Oracle just sucks off the teat of this contract for the next 10 years. So, all right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of this episode, doesn't it?
Yes, it
Very
does.
good. So don't forget, TechSNAP is live Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is...
4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC.
Of course, you can go over to jblive.info too and get the audio version. TechSNAP is available for download Thursday afternoons. Just go over to Jupiter Broadcasting and find episode 114, and you can find links to everything Alan covered. And you can also find downloads, RSS subscriptions, the torrent feed, all of that stuff over there. All right, everyone. Well, thanks.
One other bit of interesting news is that I'm confirmed for speaking at EuroBSDCon 2013 in Malta.
Oh, when's that?
The end of September.
Dun, 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 dun. Malta, huh?
Yes, I will be giving this talk, Mitigating and Isolating Denial of Service Attacks at Layer 7 Using Global Server Load Balancing.
It's probably asking for way too much trouble. It's probably just easier to shoot ahead, but one of these times it would be fun to do a TechSNAP on location. I know it'd be a pain in the butt. You'd probably just have to bring the headset or something, but... Right,
and... So I imagine maybe we'd record ahead and then do a small thing while I'm there.
Okay.
It'll depend on the scheduling.
Yeah, maybe...
The problem was last time on the Thursday during the time slot, I was in the middle of
a talk. Yeah.
No, the developer summit.
Yeah.
And so, I couldn't duck out.
Yeah, no, I know. It might not work. But one of these times, and you seem to be going more and more.
Yes, because in November, I will be attending but not speaking at VBSDCon in Virginia.
Virginia. You come down to the United States, I feel obligated like I should show up. Like if you're in my territory.
Well, Virginia's kind of quite a ways away.
I know.
Virginia is farther away from you than I am now.
Maybe I can just get a copy of the NSA feed and just kind of feel like I'm there. Just get a real-time copy of it all.
But that conference is hosted by VeriSign.
Oh, cool.
Who are the people that use FreeBSD to run .com and .net.
Right. I've heard of that before.
And a bunch of other things.
I've heard of those.
Yes. Yeah. They're kind of the infrastructure of the whole internet.
Turns out. All right. Well, I believe that brings us to the end of this week's episode of TechSNAP. Don't forget, we want to see you right back here next week. Join us live, so that way you can hang out in our chat room and tell us how ridiculous we are or why NFS works perfectly just fine on Windows, like we learned today via our chat room. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in this week's episode. We'll see you right back here next week.